It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name's Alexis.
I'm Isaac.
And today we are talking about The Manor of Dreams by Christina Lee. Isaac, do you want to do the plot summary, or shall I?
Why don't you?
All right, so Vivian Yin is a Hollywood star. She won an Academy Award back in the 70s or early 80s, and she has just died, and her two daughters and granddaughter have come to hear the reading of the will, and for some reason, another woman and her daughter are also there, and they find out that this other woman, Elaine Dung, and her daughter, Nora, are getting the house, which is the bulk of the inheritance, as it is a very nice house in somewhere near LA. And so, in order to resolve this inheritance dispute, both families decide they're just going to camp out in the house while they figure out the legal stuff and snipe at each other. And unfortunately, the house is extremely haunted.
Mega haunted. So haunted. Super haunted.
Layers upon layers of haunting. And so then at that point, the story starts to switch between the perspectives of Vivian and one of her daughters back in the day, and then also the present day and the 7 days that these 5 women are in the house.
Thank you. I have nothing to add to that. For those curious, I lost hosting privileges by screwing up the intro 3 times in a row, and those are the rules. Do you want to keep driving?
Sure. So, are there wizards?
No, actually. Not in this one.
But there are powerful malicious ghosts.
Yes, but they're not. I mean, I'm afraid that I can't even stretch it as much as we usually like to. This is not a book that has wizards in it.
No, there's some men who clearly want to be wizards, but they never really quite pull it off. But are there lesbians?
Oh yeah, no, there are lesbians.
Yeah, there's more than 2 lesbians. And are there fights?
Yes, there's plenty of fighting. Also, the lesbianism may be supernatural.
Certainly, the lesbianism may have some supernatural effects.
Or causes.
Or possibly causes.
Yeah. So there's that.
So why should you read this book?
It's really good. I mean, this is one of the more obvious, this book is just good books that we've come across. I know why you should read this book.
Yes. I mean, so this has lesbians, terrible lawyer mom, and it opens with a quote from Hong Lo Meng, the good translation of Hong Lo Meng even, and has Hong Lo Meng, Dream of the Red Chamber, Story of the Stone references scattered throughout, is very much drawing on that novel. And, it's just real good. If you're working with Hong Lo Meng, you're already starting at an advantage, I think.
Yeah, no, this one, despite being a horror novel, which you're not generally into, this one I think is tailor-made for you. But I think it
really is.
It has plenty for not you consumers of content also.
Yes, I believe this was pitched to us, I think by Saya, as Siren Queen meets The Haunting of Hill House, which, Chinese actress, Hollywood, faded glamour, brutality, and an extremely haunted house, plus some generational trauma. So, and then on top of that, there's also plant horror, which I'm actually a big fan of.
Yes. Those are possibly better comps than the ones that this came with, which is Mexican Gothic meets The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Yes, which is basically like, okay, old Hollywood and
not
immigrants?
White.
Yeah, old Hollywood and ethnic. So the author does list Mexican Gothic as one of her inspirations, so it's not a completely spurious comp, but still, I think Siren Queen meets The Haunting of Hill House is a much more accurate idea of what kind of vibe you're getting from this.
All right.
Why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, I'm in it and I don't like it.
It's intense.
Yeah, I found Well, here's my definition of a horror story. Since we don't do a lot of horror, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to talk about horror qua horror, right? So,
It's basically been like this and Feast While You Can in terms of like good, memorable horror.
yes. And so my definition of horror is a book in which horrible things happen that you don't want to think about, but in order to make you feel better about it, stuff like, ghosts and vampires and curses are also there to distract you
Yes.
from the real bad stuff. And this is definitely one of those. And
Sometimes to distract you and sometimes to, make the metaphor literal in a way that hopefully forces you to pay attention to the bad stuff.
yes, but if you're, stressed out about, money or being a failure, generational wealth, inheritance, that kind of stuff, this book has a lot of that in it. And yeah, no, it's kind of harrowing, even if you're not worried about plant monsters. But other than that, honestly, like as a piece of literature, I think it's like really well paced, well characterized. There's nothing extraneous in it.
Yeah, it's incredibly gripping too.
I can't see much in the way of I can't see much of a reason why you wouldn't want to read this book. I would say, even if some of the conclusions that it eventually comes to might be a little questionable, but that's horror for you. There's always something a little normative at the heart of horror, and I think that this even fights against that. So, so yeah, no, if you're not going to be bothered by one of the list of content warnings, I don't think that there's any reason not to read this book.
So let's get into that list of content warnings, shall we?
Yes.
There's a fair amount of gore. There's domestic violence. There's homophobia.
Yep.
There's generational trauma, abusive parenting. There's a wide range of bad parenting. There's murder. There's gaslighting, like actual gaslighting.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. Yeah.
Lawyer parents.
Poisoning.
Yeah.
Lawyer parents.
Body horror. Did we say body horror?
No, we didn't, but there's also body horror. There's psychological horror. There's definitely a lot of, is this supernatural or am I going insane?
Yep.
And some of that is answered definitely supernatural, but some of it is kind of left open.
Yes. Yes.
So, which I like.
Like any good haunted house story, it's really, this could just be inheritable mental illness right up until the point where the house. Whoops, that's a spoiler, but you can probably guess.
But I will say that there's a thing that horror tends to do where it does collapse into the big, the action piece, and that often takes away a lot of the scariness of what's come before it, because it says, oh, well, it really was just all supernatural things with one easily explainable cause. And this does not actually take that out.
Yes.
There's enough layers of haunting and ghosts going on here that it's possible not all of them are supernatural. And I thought that was really well done.
Like, it's been a long time since I have been, chalk this up to my being jaded or old or whatever, but it's been a long time since I've been going along at a climax of the book and being like, oh no, don't die, don't die, don't die, to the fictional character. So. And whether I got my wish or not, we should discuss after the spoiler zone. But
yes, so are we ready to go to the spoiler zone?
Yeah,
now?
I think so.
All right, let's do it.
Spoiler zone. Thank you for taking over the responsibility of organizing that, because my brain is pudding right now. But yeah, no. So when I say that, I'm in this book and I don't like it, I am thinking particularly of her. Is her name Rennie?
Renata, in fact.
Renata, in fact. Who is the little sister, although I'm not the little sister for a number of reasons, who is who grows up being the sort of the charming fuck up, and then runs out of gas being the charming fuck up, and runs out of money and runs out of people.
Basically runs out of charming.
Yes.
And then she's just the fuck up.
And is then just stuck with shame and mental health and addiction issues. And she gets to choose whether she gets eaten by the house. And unfortunately, the book actually leaves it ambiguous as to whether she does get eaten by the house or not, which but I really wish that it had just let her out and, pat her on the head and told her that everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, I think I do not think she actually made. I mean, part of this is I always assume the worst when it comes to ambiguous endings. It's some sort of weird personality flaw of mine. But
no, she clearly ran straight into the haunted garden. No, she's toast.
She's toast. But the thing is that Rennie was also one of my favorites. I really wanted things to turn out well for her. They were all I found all of them kind of relatable in one way or another. But Rennie was like the one who I felt the most, I think, empathy for and wanting to be okay. But it does make sense for her character.
No, it does. It absolutely does. Which is just unfortunate, if that's the character that one empathizes the most with as the book is going on, to be like, oh, you're doomed, I see. Well, okay then. But, that's my problem, I would say.
Right. I mean, part of this is, part of what dooms her is that even at the very end, she's just not willing to... she's not willing to take responsibility, but also she's not willing to push back against, being the family scapegoat.
Yes. No, the revelation...
And I think that's what would have saved her.
The revelation that the Swiss Army knife of haunting that this house is undergoing has a particular haunting just for her, which is her projection of her mother being disappointed in her, which for all of her mother's many, many crimes and faults does not seem to be one of them. Textually.
Yeah, in fact, right. And in fact, the ghost of her dead sister very specifically says, no, that wasn't Mom. Mom was already dead then.
Yes. And
she just refuses to accept it on some level. She wants to be punished.
Yes. That is...
Even when she finds out that, she's not psychotic and she's not, that her early hallucinations are in fact something that everyone else in her family was experiencing, and her older sister was gaslighting her into denying it out of fear. And, she doesn't, she gets mad and she goes, wow, this completely, helped derail the path of my life. But she sort of twists that into further self-loathing instead of going, fuck you, I'm out of here.
Yes. I think that it is this book is about the family curse. And one of the great things about the way that this book portrays the family curse is that even if there was just the one problem, they tend to accumulate additional problems over time. That's the thing about this sort of inherited trauma, is that every generation gets to experience it in its own way, and that adds to the pile by the time it gets to you. And
there's multiple family curses accumulating at this point.
Yes.
Because this goes back to, this goes back to their railroad baron, many great grandfather. Rennie specifically is railroad baron, many great grandfather.
Yes. So this leads me to one of the theses that I have about this book, or that was inspired by this book, which is, since we haven't done a haunted house yet, with the possible exception of the Nightbird's Feather. I think there are haunted houses in the Nightbird's Feather. But the same rules apply here. Is that all houses are haunted, at least in America. And the reason for that is that there is so much money in every house because of the way that our real estate system works, that there is some sort of horrible crime at the root of it. And even if there isn't, it's all built on stolen land. It's all built on the proverbial Native American burial ground. So every single house is haunted. It's just that this one is like quadruple mega haunted for various reasons. And
partly that just each generation keeps, I mean, so I'm not 100% sure about your every house is haunted, except in the sense that, yes, every family has its curse. Or maybe that's just you and me. But like, every family has its curse, and every instance of generational wealth is in fact rooted in some form of injustice.
yes.
No matter how much you would like to pretend otherwise.
Yes, all houses are haunted. But so are all of us. And that's where we keep our money, and money attracts ghosts. The only solution is a kind of communist exorcism of property, and of history, and of family. Good luck.
But there's a thing where, because you can see this in throughout this book, is people keep getting a chance to turn away from that, and they keep failing to.
It's incredibly difficult to turn down.
They keep choosing to go back.
Like hundreds and thousands of dollars is the problem.
Right. No, and actually, well, so there's a couple of things going on. So, I mean, that's Vivian's dilemma.
Yes.
And the book spells it out, and the book does a very good job of making it a very compelling dilemma where you go, okay, personally, especially when you get to post car crash. Oh, we should absolutely add trigger warning, content warning for car crash. When you get to post car crash, and Vivian is sort of looking back at the ruins of her life and going, maybe I should have just gotten a divorce instead of murdering my abusive husband. And you're like, yeah, because the thing you were trying to preserve, the stability of these two interdependent families, was lost by your unwillingness to do so. And like, so you would have lost it anyway. Might as well do it while the kids are still alive. But at the same time, before that happens, even though that the fallout is going to end up being terrible because you get to see how broken everyone is in the present day, it makes sense. You go, okay, she probably would lose custody of at least her youngest, and her, her sort of co-parenting their oldest daughter may have to drop out of college. Probably not at that point, because it's the 90s actually, so at that point the California education system is starting to decay. But
I will just say that I went through a true crime phase, which thankfully I'm out of at this point, but we're going to kill the husband because divorcing him would just cause too much problems is the root of many a real life murder, and that is from the 50s up till now.
Yes, well, no-fault divorce absolutely has saved many lives.
This is true.
Of course, there are times when the fault legal barrier is not the thing that is stopping people from divorcing, and that's why often people still do murder their spouses.
As in this case, it's both, because I think that Vivian is not entirely out of her mind in regards to what he might do if she actually were to pull the trigger. So.
No, she's absolutely right. Like, if she tried to get a divorce, especially like he was trying to get her involuntarily committed, yeah. And he might have succeeded, at least briefly. And he definitely would have gotten custody of their youngest daughter. She probably would have retained custody of the oldest two, given that he was only their stepfather. But she would have, but then again, she would have had to move back in with her aunt and uncle, and, that would have sucked and been really awkward, especially because she'd been sort of slowly phasing them out. But they would have taken her.
Yes, no, that
at that point.
That is very clear. No, Vivian absolutely makes the tragically wrong decision for, like, tragic flaw, unable to give up the dream reasons. That is clear. Yes, and Vivian is...
But she's doing it to look after it, but she's doing it, partly because she really cares about other people, and she's trying to protect, her community.
To a certain extent, yes.
To a certain extent.
But
I'm not saying it's the right decision. I'm just saying I can absolutely see how somebody stays in, how somebody who is capable of going, I am being abused, he is going to kill me, I need to get out of this. I can see how she concludes that actually murder is the smarter decision here.
Although it is also clear that there is an element of pride to it. I mean, the first time that she calls up her aunt and is like, I need help, and then, backs out of it, it's not because of fear, it's because of pride. And
yeah, no, there's absolutely also an element of pride, and also an element of, right now I'm, despite the fact that he has completely killed her career. Well, first of all, part of why she decides to kill him is clearly a desire to punish him for what he's done to her career.
Yes,
it's not just protection, but also, she loses, right now she is still Hollywood low nobility, gentry, if not royalty. And, if she divorces him, then she's just a twice divorced immigrant woman with 3 children and no real means of support. And that's, she doesn't want to lose what, she got.
So we have various seeds of the curse here, going back in time. We don't actually get to spend any time with the progenitor of the curse, the mining baron who buried hundreds of Chinese workers under a mountain out of greed.
Including possibly her great-great-uncle.
But we have the sort of the original sin here is, greed, expansionism, colonialism, manifest destiny, essentially. All of these phases are extremely American, I just want to point out. We have that, and then we have this Hollywood dream thing, which is another sort of which is the American dream, because she is a poor immigrant from China via Hong Kong who does the American dream and strikes it rich in America, and then that being part of that narrative is part of what dooms her.
Yes, but the thing is that she is also bringing her own kind of family curse with her.
Yes,
her family. They start in Zhejiang, and then they flee that to Fujian. They flee the Japanese to Fujian, and then I don't think it's stated outright, but it's at least implied that they're fleeing the communists to Hong Kong. Minor side note: the one criticism I have of this book is that she absolutely should not be speaking Mandarin. She should probably be speaking Fujianese.
Actually, we should talk about that just a little bit, because speaking.
Okay, we can come back to that in a minute. But so like she's fleeing that, and then she's she follows her husband to America. So she's got this sort of family thing of not being able to put down roots.
Yes.
And which I think is part of what traps her in the house, is that then she's offered the, extremely American dream of, no, but here you can own property and stay put.
Yes, there's the age-old question of what causes a person to become an immigrant or to become, and the answer is there are a million reasons, but there's either the threat or the promise that draws you out. And for her, via her husband at least, it's the promise. She's not an immediate threat where she is established in Hong Kong.
In fact, she's got a burgeoning career, and she was Lin Daiyu in one of the we'll get into all the Hong Meng references.
Yes, but, only to grow up to be Lady Tsai. And it is her granddaughter who gets to be Lin Daiyu, and her housekeeper's daughter who ends up being Bao Chai. Actually, other way around. But that is something that we can come back to also.
Yes.
I wanted to point out though that there is something particularly like tropey, but in a like the way that America destroys you in every generation here. And my favorite thing about this novel is that it updates the story it tells and the way that it tells it with every generation of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Like the part of the story that takes place in the 90s buries its gays.
Yes.
And which is another, and that's another layer of the curse, the gay burying, is yet another thing that is done by the normative needs of the culture, as we go on. And which ends up being the thing that actually brings down the house. This final indignity, this insult of burying the gays. But it's not, and I want to say that I'm not saying that this is 100% uncomplicated or accurate reading, but the fact that they all, everybody eventually has to lose their sister in order to, and they have to reckon with losing their sisters in order to move on. They have to get over sort of the survivor's guilt and the desire for revenge that came with it. And I'm wondering if there's a thematic significance to the fact that it is the half American sister finally that they have to get rid of. Ethnically, I should say. Oh, that's another miss, buddy. No such thing as ethnically American. I meant white.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah, I was thinking about that too. That, it's something I felt a little bit weird about, because it's the one thing where it sort of becomes something more about, about your inborn, your genetic determinism. Where, the white one, the half white, who is still obviously, not white in her social circle, is the one who takes the brunt of the final throes of the family curse.
And is the one who's inherited her father's fecklessness and sort of wastrel tendencies also.
Yeah, so she's actually much more of a feckless wastrel than her father. Her father's way more concerned about appearances, and her father's way more concerned about prestige.
Yes, this is true.
That's part of his curse, is that he wants legitimacy, and Rennie wants fame and adoration.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that this is I don't want to say that this is the thesis of the book, because I think that every horror narrative has at least a little bit of sort of there's some sort of curse in the blood thing going on. Because horror is all about these sort of atavistic fears of contagion and corruption and decay.
Yeah. Maybe not every kind of horror, but certainly possibly all haunted house horror, and certainly anything that's dealing with multi-generational.
Yes, but it did sort of stick out to me that that part of it. And speaking of, but here's another thing that could have been read as a curse and a contagion. It's do you think that our two grandchildren of these two families would have fallen for each other as quickly as they did if it weren't for the extremely lesbian nature of the haunting of the house that they were in?
I mean, it is established that both of them are lesbians going in.
Yes.
I think they probably would not have escalated quite so, the relationship quite so quickly. But this is something they're both 22, 23, and both attractive young lesbian women under a lot of stress.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely not out of the question.
One of them rescues the other from, I think that it's probably, you could argue that, in fact, the curse is sort of pushing them into this. And certainly, the fact that, because Sophie, the other dead sister, is the one who's driving the destructive parts of the curse, and she's the one, and, the only thing that can cause her to ever sort of draw back the horrible thorny vines that are going to rip people apart is her sister and her niece. And so, you could say, oh, well, oh, if my niece wants to rescue this person, I guess I'll let her go. Sort of, undead lesbian aunt trying to give her niece a boost. But
speaking of references to our favorite media, I'm trying to save my lesbian lover from these rose vines, and the only thing that's going to do it is my bodily fluids is not un-Utena.
No, it's not.
Although Utena with tears rather than blood, but back to whiteness.
Actually, just returning to the question of, how much of Rennie being the one who takes the brunt of the curse is inherited from her white father. I'm not actually, I think that is something of an extra reading, but I'm not sure how much the text supports it, partly because it's really clear that Lucille has inherited a bunch of stuff from her white stepfather.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
She's actually the one who gets his obsession with legitimacy. She's the one who goes to his alma mater.
Yes.
And so I think that some of this, I think that it's more that a lot of actually what Rennie is bearing the brunt of is the needing to be loved that she gets from both her parents.
This is true. And there's some tragic things about Rennie, like her, her obsession over her own fading looks and stuff that is very much her mom.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that there's sort of, this is one of those things where, there's a reading that could be pulled out of there, but I don't feel like it's strong enough to say this is what the book is saying.
Yeah. And she's the one, both of Vivian's surviving daughters make very, make poor marital decisions. But Rennie's the one who's much closer, who really makes, in some ways, her mother's same mistake of, oh, here's somebody who's wealthy and glamorous, and, well-connected, and marrying him.
Yeah.
And then, actually she also sort of works as a counter argument to, well, why didn't Vivian just get a divorce? Because, okay, Rennie just got a divorce. She actually had way less to lose than Vivian did at that point, and it still just completely ruins her.
Thank you for closing that loop, because it's not one that we should have left unclosed. But I'm just trying to remember where I was going next. Oh yeah. And I think that there would have been, in a different book, a reading where the lesbianism is part of the curse here, but this book is very much not interested in that and wants to, and it's not quite a Queer Desire is the Revolutionary Moment counter argument. I think that this book is too smart for that. But it definitely wants to make the point that the homophobia is in fact the manifestation of the curse here, and that's what is, and that's what we're given another chance to overcome.
Yeah.
Along with the other chains that need to be broken are we say that some of the people here are motivated by greed or ambition, but also revenge is the other big one, because it's the curse really does a number on Elaine Dung.
It really does. Yeah, and it does even before her sister dies.
Yes, but sort of the haunted house sort of curse element manifests itself a number of ways, but one of the ways it manifests itself is by getting into the head of the people who are living in the house via nightmares, but also via changes to their personality.
Right, but also via showing them these brief dreams and visions of the thing that they want the most.
Exactly. And I think that actually
except with Elaine, it can't do that with Elaine, because what she wants the most is to get out, and so instead it really does sort of more directly change her personality.
Well, I think that the closest thing to what happens to Elaine is what happened to Vivian's husband. I think that
I really disagree, but I want to hear your argument first.
I think it's because it's outside of it's two different vectors, right? But the reason that the husband, do you remember his name? I'm having a hard.
I'm blanking on it. It's some, it's some exactly what you would expect a Hollywood actor to be named kind of name.
So, Richard, which isn't his name, but that's what I'm going to call him.
I'll find it in a sec.
His childhood trauma is that his mom sold the house out from under him, and
it is Richard.
It's the old Hollywood name. Yay! His mom sold the house out from under him, and he wants it back because he wants to fix that part of his childhood. And he wants to be able to succeed here where his parents failed. His mom, incidentally, and the rest of his family know full well the place is fucking haunted, as becomes clear in their wedding. It would have been nice if somebody had said something.
No, well, it's clear that his mom did, because he keeps being like, "Oh yeah, no, she thinks she saw a ghost once." You're like, "Oh, okay, no, she actually was like, no, we're not going back. We sold the house because it was fucking haunted," and he's just dismissing it.
And what Elaine wants out of coming back to this is, it is revenge for her sister. But it is like but the way the house takes advantage of that desire for revenge is like I can make the perfect place. It turns that desire into, I can take this place and make it the perfect environment for my children and my family. And sort of, it offers her the possibility of redeeming a trauma, which is not really
and fixing her childhood,
exactly
fixing what was missing from her childhood, which is because what's missing from her childhood, the lack that she felt growing up was that there was always this class barrier, and she was on the wrong side of it because she's the housekeeper and the gardener's daughter, and so, but if she comes back and she owns the house and they're the supplicants, then that fixes what was missing. No, that's actually that's a kind of a compelling argument. I'm going to present a counter argument though.
Okay.
So because also the thing that Richard really wants is, he wants a lot of things, but as you say, he wants what's missing from his childhood, but he wants his lost patrimony, and part of that is, he wants his California roots. You talk to people from old California families, and it's like talking to people from old Texan families.
Yeah.
It's one of those states where people really, feel a sort of quasi-national identity to. And he feels like he was deprived of this chance to be, a West Coast man with just like a little bit of cowboy and a lot of Hollywood glamour.
It really is interesting how that is always co-located with these like incredibly destructive boom and bust, gold/oil rush things, isn't it?
Right. And timber and the railroads and, and so like he wants to come back and possess this as this like reclaiming of, he grows up with one kind of white male old money privilege, but he wants the other kind of white male old money privilege that you can get in America.
Yes.
He wants the more masculine one, basically. He wants to leave the waspiness behind and, go have a ranch. So he comes back and he ignores all these warnings.
I do want to push back on that a little bit because he's too much of a fancy pants to have a ranch. Most of what he's doing is remodeling, not, raising cattle.
Right, but he does a lot of even though other people are actually doing the renovation, he does a lot of like walking around with his sleeves rolled up and knocking on things and pretending that he's being is working alongside the contractors basically.
Right, yes. As is his right as a man.
Right, like when they buy the house, suddenly he gets really into sort of cosplaying this much more manly man type.
Sure.
Despite the fact that, yes, he's a fancy pants Yaley. But the thing is that Evelyn growing up, and he wants this all the time. What he wants is to come back and have this.
Mm-hmm.
And Evelyn growing up, what she wants is to get out, go to Berkeley and be a social justice activist, like staying up late arguing about Marx.
Yes.
And that is what she gets until her sister dies. I mean, the thing that stops her from getting what she wants is that her sister's death creates this unhealed wound that means she can never move on from this house that she really wants to, like, she wants to erase her past, another fine American tradition. And she can't because of her sister's death. Like, she can pretend, but she can't. And so, when she comes back, like, when Richard comes back to the house, he changes, but it's mostly just brings back all of his bad features. But when Evelyn comes back to the house, first what she wants is to sell it and pay for her daughter's medical school and give the rest to housing justice organizations. And that's very much in keeping with the person that she was as a teenager. But as she's, but then she gets tied up in these, she starts having migraines and nosebleeds. Like, she has a physical reaction to a degree that no one else really does.
That is true.
And I think that like the house really has to kind of fundamentally try to rewire her. And I think you're right that it's playing on her desire for revenge and her, like, her own unhealed childhood wounds, and, grievances. But I think that it has to fundamentally change her in a way that it doesn't need to do with anyone else, because everyone else has a thing that is tying them to the house, basically from the beginning.
This is true. It's kind of it's an interesting thing, and I wonder if this reflects sort of the moral character of the horror here. That there's a whole thing where it's like, all of these negative emotions arise from this economic inequality, and whether it's the desire of Richard to be the right kind of aristocrat, or the desire of Vivian to leave behind her roots, or the desire of Elaine to have revenge on the aristocrats. But the sort of, it does feel like, you really do have to literally monster her to make her into that kind of caricature of a leftist, where you don't really have to work as hard with the rich.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder whether this is like, it's the book really struggling to make this a thematic parallel when I'm not sure that it naturally is one.
Well, I think it's more the house struggling to do it. I think
Sure.
It works fairly well in the book, partly because it's doing several things in the book. Having Elaine be the one who the house has to completely debilitate is, like, also works because she's the one she's the living person with the most secrets, who has the most secret knowledge. And so we can't get her perspective if we want to have this, like, unfolding of revelations. And so, sure, let's just completely knock her out with a migraine and horrible nosebleeds, because, boy, that will take you out of the action and excuse a lot of not communicating with people. And, like, migraines mess with your ability to think real hard. So, and also with your emotions. And so, and I think that, because she's not becoming a caricature of a leftist. It's to some degree, it's her leftist ideals being co-opted, or, like, not even being co-opted, but just being overwritten, being, like, okay, if she was able to stick to her leftist ideals, and her daughter keeps saying, "Ma, what are you doing?
Right.
You were going to give this to housing justice organizations. You had a list of, like, places where this money could be used." And she goes, no, we could have, it's distancing herself from her values and instead pulling her to this other part of herself that's still there, which is this fundamental resentment. And to some degree, it's okay. She, unlike a lot of the other people, turned her fears and resentments into a drive to make the world better. And part of how she did that was by, getting the fuck out.
Yes. And
by drawing her back in, it's taking away the one bit of agency she was able to rest and make herself a better person out of. And, allowing all the things that she suppressed and escaped to win.
There's something here about how the child of the servant family sees the garden in full bloom the first time that she sees it. It's the same ruins, but it looks like opportunity to one family and failure to the other, even though it's the same trap for both. Yes. Although, and I should note that this, that it's still, and this is like, it's still a partial dealing with it that she was doing. Like, the thing about the haunting and this sort of climax is that it forces everybody to deal with it. And before this moment, Elaine was still not telling her daughter that she had a dead aunt, you know?
Oh, no. And I'm not saying that Elaine was dealing with it. I'm saying she was escaping it.
Sure, yes.
The fact that she wasn't dealing with it is what allows her to get pulled back in. Mm-hmm. Like, she's just walking around with this gaping wound, and she's real good at ignoring it. But, this is also part of why, it probably was smart of her to just drop out of her poli-sci program. But, this is also why, she gives up all these grand ambitions to make the world a better place. And she sort of compromises. She has a job that she hates, but then on the weekend she does a lot of activism stuff. Yes. And she doesn't, and, she's clearly a better parent to her daughter than Lucy is to Madeline. But, she's keeping all of this stuff. Yeah. Her way of dealing with the family curse is by just pretending that none of it exists and hoping that somehow her daughter never has to deal with it.
And meanwhile, Lucy actually does follow the path that she didn't follow, but without any particular, idea or need beyond, I'm going to be a congressman or congresswoman, and fails because she has no heart behind it.
Right. And, and it's also, and that's very much, she's in some ways still trying to prove herself to her long dead father, who's, her stepfather, but she really sees as her father.
Back to whiteness again. It's like we're a couple of white people or something.
So one thing, we've been talking a lot about class, which, makes sense given who we are. Race is something that's really interesting here because it really only shows up because you'd think that the racial divide would be more at the heart of what's going on in the family. And sometimes it is, because I think that a lot of Vivian's fears are rooted in that racial divide. But, her daughters, like Ada and Lucy, don't think a lot about how their dad is white and they're not even mixed race. And, with Rennie, we see the ways that being mixed race hits her in a way that we don't actually see the ways that being Chinese hits Lucy. Except, there's this interesting thing where her mother sabotages Lucy's burgeoning relationship with the white boy and seems to really approve of her relationship with the, very successful, upwardly mobile Chinese-American lawyer.
Yeah, I think that a significant part of this is that this story is being told from a Chinese American perspective.
Yes, and part of that is that they, most of the people in this are Chinese American.
Right, and so it's sort of in a nice reversal. The only the otherness is worth being commented upon, and that otherness is in this instance is being owned by Richard and Rennie. Although one of the things about Vivian's relationship with Richard is that he does not see the constant parade of microaggressions that she has to deal with being a Chinese American actress, which
he doesn't see, and to some degree I think,
and is in some way enabling it because it is her exoticism that is in some way what is attracted to him, even though he is better at expressing that in a way that is not immediately insulting than all of the other people around him.
Yes, but also her exoticism is part of his self-branding.
Yes, it absolutely is, which is it is a kind of exploitation which mirrors what his family did before this point.
Right, like he sells to her as, oh, let's name it after you. Let's call it Yin Manor. But it's very clear that from his perspective, this is, look at my exotic Oriental beauty and my exotic Oriental, Oriental, but not too weird, an exotic house. That like he's really farming this for cred, and then every time that they have somebody over who wouldn't be impressed with Chinese food, suddenly they bring in a chef.
Yes. Speaking though of normalizing Chineseness, let's swing back to the Mandarin again, just for a moment.
Yes. Okay. So I do have a minor pet peeve, which is that, her family. If her family's going from Zhejiang to Fujian to Hong Kong, and she, I believe, was born in Fujian, then probably her family is definitely speaking some form of Southern Chinese. Mandarin is not a national language when they go to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong isn't using Mandarin at this point. The handover doesn't happen until 1997, and so the idea that she's speaking Mandarin at home is actually this weird. It's this weird projection of like PRC and to a lesser degree Kuomintang, successful erasure of all of these other, the validity and how widespread all these other Chinese languages are.
Yes.
It should have been, they really should have been speaking, and especially because in Chinatown, like when she's in the San Francisco Chinatown, I mean, the languages that are being spoken in San Francisco's Chinatown at this point are mostly going to be Cantonese and, maybe Hakka and like Hokkien.
There is some mention of other dialects, so it's not like we're ignoring this completely. Like it talks about her. Right.
Like they mentioned that they do Shanghainese karaoke, though.
How that enters into this is another question, but
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's even more awkward in the audiobook, because in the text version of the book we have there's some Hanzi and then there's some Pinyin.
Yeah. Which also, it shouldn't be Pinyin at this point when she's saying like Chinaida in like the 80s, given again that she's from Hong Kong, so her family probably was fleeing the communists. It should absolutely be Wade Giles, if not Guoyu Robots.
Right.
Okay, it probably wouldn't be Guoyu Robots because she's from Hong Kong.
We can always
it would probably be Wade Giles, but we can dream. If she was coming from Taiwan, it would be Guoyu Robots.
But the audiobook deals with this by occasionally inserting said in Mandarin to the spoken text.
No. That's also, there's a lot of things where the spoken text is said in Mandarin, where like the text says, oh, they switched to Mandarin.
Sure. I don't know how much of this is added, or how much of it is the original text, but there is a bit, and I don't know if this is the original text, where she is looking at some notebook and it says these notes are written in traditional Mandarin. That's not a thing.
No.
You cannot write in Mandarin.
I mean, you sort of can, because I was actually just reading a really smart, interesting undergraduate thesis about this, arguing that written, that actually standardized written Chinese as it is most common these days is in fact Mandarin, and that there's not really, it's very hard to write topolex. There's just not character support for writing a lot of the topolex in Hanzi. But no, it should be traditional characters. It should not be traditional Mandarin.
Yes. I just wanted to make the point, which we have now made ad nauseum, that this is part of an intentional whitewashing campaign, if I can use that word, on the part of, as you said, the PRC and the Kuomintang to attempt to erase the history of Chinese languages that are not Mandarin. But anyway.
Yes, and it is actually it's really unfortunate that this ends up showing up even in like Chinese American novels that, and this is mostly the PRC, like, the Kuomintang was pretty much limited to having this happen on Taiwan. Like the PRC has really succeeded in doing this, and it's actually genuinely unfortunate.
Yes, and this is an effort that is tied to current, ongoing genocide being perpetrated by the PRC. Might as well just get that out of the way. Anywho.
All right. Moving right along.
Moving right along.
Can we talk about Hong Lemong now?
The Dream of the Red Chamber is a book by Cao Shui-Jin, the last of the 4 great novels of China. And I hope you've read it by this point, because we're going to be talking about it for the next half hour. Yes, let's talk about Hong Lemong. I think one of the real sort of ties to Hong Lemong, besides like the sort of to me, based on my sort of hazy memories of Hong Lemong, felt like, character, because Lucy feels sort of like a Wang Shifeng to me,
I don't know. Well, Lucy, there's no way that Lucy would ever be, carrying on an illicit affair with her nephew.
No, we've left the nephew fucking out of the equation.
It is interesting. This has so many different kinds of generational trauma, and yet no childhood sexual abuse.
I was kind of worried for a while. I was also kind of worried that all of these people were secretly related for a while, but thankfully that isn't how it went.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, it didn't. There's enough awful things going on here that I guess you don't need to add childhood sexual abuse.
Yes, this is true.
It turns out that there's a lot of ways to accumulate family trauma.
But what I was going to say was that the way that the thing that resonated the most to me is like this feeling like, no, even as we sort of mourn the crumbling of this dynasty, it was always shit. Always.
Yes!
Except when you were a child within the walls. And then you had to leave being a child within the walls, Yes.
And, and then also there's this idea that, the wealth came in and the wealth is going out, and the unwillingness to deal with what that means and the different ways, the different actions that people are taking to try to grasp onto it are just going to make the fall hurt worse when it happens.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, the kids in the 90s, and it's not, obviously it's not ideal, but they are just like, and again, who can't relate to being a 90s teen and not really being cognizant of all of the shit that is about to fall on you until you're sort of snapped coldly out of it feels very much to me like,
well, and I mean, as far as getting like explicitly Hong Lemong parallels, the fact that you have the 2 children falling into what is going to be a doomed love, and completely that these children who at one point were at least somewhat observant and now are just burying and distancing themselves from the family by pressing flowers in books and by like flowers in poetry. I mean, it's very much Bao Yu and Dai Yu burying the flowers in the garden moments.
Exactly.
It's super, like, it's this very sweet romantic teen coming of age thing, and you already know that it's doomed because of the structure of the book, but kind of actually unlike Hong Lemong, except that Hong Lemong you also kind of know because it opens with, well, she's going to shed a lifetime of tears.
Yeah, no, you definitely know it's a tragedy from the very beginning of Hong Lemong.
Yes, but like in this case, that both of them are going to be dead, which actually adds this wonderful extra layer of horror because they go through multiple drives, and every single time they get in the car, you're like, is this the drive that's going to kill them? Until the one where it's the drive that's going to kill them. But at that point, I at least was like sufficiently emotionally invested that I was like, I know this is the drive that's going to kill them, but I can't help wishing that they could get away.
Right. I have it exactly the same feeling. It's like, is there any way that this isn't the drive that's going to kill them? Maybe the next generation is mistaken about what happened to them. Maybe they got away, and it just seems like they got away, and
it was just like, right, it was just covered up, right? That's not going to happen, but you can't help hoping. Yeah. But just like, I really liked that. This is something that I think this book does very well, is captures a little bit of that Hong Lemong magic of this beautiful moment surrounded by flowers and young love with like, wow, horrible family abuse is going on and is, undermining the physical and moral and spiritual walls and financial walls around them.
Yes.
I think that's, I don't feel like that's something that I've seen necessarily captured in a lot of things that reference Hong Lomong. And I thought it was really well done. And so, speaking as somebody who loves Hong Lomong so much that I went and got an entire PhD, partly in Chinese history, partly to like understand what happens to a minor character in it. I just well done.
Yes. And we've upgraded our relationship from being cousins to being lesbians, which, that's good. Step in the right direction.
Right, but also like it's got that same, initially they think that Dayu would be suitable, and then then they decide that she's sort of constitutionally unsuitable. And also I think that they decide they have, bigger ambitions for what they're going to do with Bayu's marriage. But there is this idea, there's this sort of, I think that lesbianism is actually a pretty good way of capturing some of the sort of fundamental unsuitability, including the fact that like Baoyu is kind of secretly a trans lesbian. But,
yes, no, Baoyu definitely has gender
really
things going on.
Trans bisexual, but also actually the touch that Vivian, there's not a lot of physical descriptions of the characters. Like it actually is pretty deep into the like Ada Sophie romance before you even learn how long their respective, like what their respective haircuts are.
Sure.
And so, but if you know Hong Lomong, then you can actually visualize Vivian quite well because like Dayu has a certain look, she's this extremely slender, somewhat on the pale side, large-eyed, delicate beauty.
Which is exactly how the book describes the suitable actress in Hollywood. Those characteristics exactly. Yeah.
I think it's very telling that it's the girl who looks like it's the girl who was cast as Dayu who has the successful American Hollywood career, and not say the one who was cast as Bao Chai,
yes,
who's a different kind of traditional Chinese type of beauty,
and one that does not translate as well to the silver screen, or in that era at least. I'm editing the next part out for the sake of my own dignity, but if Alexis ever makes fun of me for not knowing what a widow's peak is, you can ignore that. It is entirely baseless. There is a bit of the sort of Dayu Baoyu personality sort of stuff going on between our Nora and what's her name?
Madeline.
And Nora and Madeline are our final successful generation of...
Sort of. No, this is actually weird, because in many ways Nora strikes me as being more Bao Chai-like. She's pragmatic.
Interesting. Because I thought it was her pride that was giving me Dayu vibes, but no, you're much more of an expert on this than I am.
Well, the thing is that Nora, Nora is the one who is much more concerned with rules. She's very much like, I'm not supposed to speak to you without a lawyer present, and no, you're not. And she rescues Madeline from an incredibly haunted garden with plant monsters, and the only thing she says is, my mom says we're not supposed to go in the garden. You shouldn't either. And then walks away, which is absolutely a Bao Chai moment.
Interesting. So we finally have our Bao Chai Dayu ship then that we have been longing for these many years.
Yes.
The thing that finally solves Hong Lomong and this book. And like Bao Chai and Dayu, they actually didn't grow up together, so it's not weird.
They kind of grew up together.
But in this case, they didn't grow up together.
Yeah, in this case, they didn't grow up together. But, they're certainly less closely related than Baoyu is to either Bao Chai or Dayu.
I mean, it was the style of the time. What can one say?
Madeline definitely has some of that sort of, some of that Dayu-ness of just like, being very sort of fluttery and uncertain. I mean, she's also kind of a little bit like Baoyu in that, she's very much like, I just, who cares about my future? It'll all work out somehow. I guess I'll do, I'll kind of do the right things, but I also kind of won't. Well,
I think we could go on like this for
Yes.
a good long time.
Okay. Yes. But yes, read Hong Lemong, but this book really earns all of its Hong Lemong references, and really pulls it off. And that by itself, I think, is a reason to read the book. Do we want to? So I want to just briefly talk. I guess it's just going to be me because it's not in the audiobook. Because one of the people who recommended this to us said specifically, read it when you can look up the Chinese. Mm-hmm. When you can look up the Hanzi, because you're going to be, you'll lose something if you don't know what the Hanzi are. And I don't actually know if that's true, because they all the Hanzi are anything that's in Hanzi is immediately repeated in English.
I guess you could feel the possibility of missing out on something if you couldn't look them up yourself.
Yeah,
but
I think honestly, if you can read the characters, then you realize that there's nothing to miss out on. But if you can't read the characters and then you go look the characters up, you can maybe feel like there's something to miss out on. I mean, I guess there's the moment which I happened to bookmark of, where she says they would learn how to chirku to take in hardships, and they would learn how to eat bitterness to take in hardships. And that works particularly well in that specific paragraph, because she initially talks about how, Vivian's dreams are her daughters will learn Mandarin and they will develop palates that yearn for light winter melon soups and dumplings. And then 3 sentences later, she talks about how they would learn to literally eat bitterness, which is just, to be able to, endure hardships. But yeah, no, I think what's going on with when it's characters, because also when there's pinyin, it always has tones, which I think is just an interesting choice. I think it's when it's characters, it's when the person who's thinking the term is thinking it specifically in Mandarin and not thinking and is not speaking to somebody in English. And when people are either, speaking to somebody who doesn't speak Chinese but are using Chinese, like when Vivian calls Richard Qin Aida, or when it's, or like when they're talking in English and the other person is using Mandarin, but it's clearly just a Mandarin word that's been incorporated into their English, like ma. That's Mandarin with tone marks. I almost wish that you had read the book, because it would be interesting to
get the perspective. I mean, unfortunately, I probably could read a fair amount of these characters, so, but yeah.
A lot of them, yeah. Like, certainly when she says chahua, you would probably be able to tell that that's camellia, because, it's quite literally tea flower, and I think you've retained enough Japanese to read that, so long as you know that, tea is camellia sinensis. But,
back to the plot.
The ending. What do you think of the ending?
Do you think, I mean, I wasn't entirely certain, whether this suggested that Rennie is going to haunt them now, or whether the sort of the horrible realization in the end was just that Rennie is almost certainly dead, or whether it means to establish that maybe we're not out of the woods yet, because part of the deal with getting out of the haunting, as far as Lucy and Elaine goes, is finally accepting the deaths of their sisters.
And but Lucy doesn't accept Rennie's death.
But Lucy doesn't accept Rennie's death, absolutely. And, if you look in the mirror and you happen to see Rennie there, that suggests that things are going to go badly from here on. So I think that there is a certain, it's sort of the classic horror movie, the end, ... question mark.
Or is it?
Or
right.
Is it, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I like that, our lesbians get, the lesbianism gets a happy end. The girls, reconnect after it's been, several months since they were in the haunted house, and they establish that there's still some chemistry there, and so they're going to stay in touch and, see how it works out, but they're not, rushing into anything. They're having a very sensible, we're not actually going to U-Haul after all, slowly develop, but, maybe we can have be happy together.
Very
and,
appropriate, yes.
Yeah, move on from this, family, and develop a relationship with each other that is just based on mutual attraction and compatible senses of humor, as opposed, and some shared cultural background, as opposed to massive amounts of unprocessed family trauma. And so that's great. We get our happy ending for lesbianism, but we don't necessarily get our happy ending for, and it sounds like we might even get a happy ending for the Dung family, because other than the house, the generational curse that they had was Christianity, and Elaine seems to have moved on from that. But because Lucy is not willing to process Rennie's death, and Madeline, she doesn't see Rennie in the mirror, right? She sees herself looking like she has seen a ghost.
Exactly. It is ambiguous.
Yes, but
Speaking of the way that the book ended, though, I do want to mention that I really like how, there's a lot of, we've done books recently where it's like the thing is obvious to the reader, but not obvious to the characters, and that is a source of problems. Here, like, even though the reader obviously knows that the house is haunted from the jump, it's fine that the characters don't know that, precisely because there's so many alternative explanations for everything that's happening. And we know the limited amount of information available to all of our characters at all the various given times. But I did like that when it finally becomes undeniable that we're dealing with a haunted house, the characters don't spend any time freaking out about that. They're just like, fuck, let's get out of this haunted house.
Yes.
That's a very good way to handle that. And I think,
yes, the house is coming down. Let's get out.
Yes. That there's no like, hand wringing about it in that moment, because that would be stupid.
Yes. Actually, so a couple other things I did want to talk about. Sorry, I know this is running over.
It's okay. We can go along on this one. I know that it's that there's a lot of hooks in it.
Yeah. So another thing that I really liked that this did was, you have the first few chapters are all set in the present, all set in the house, and so you think, oh, this is the dynamic. Clearly, like, Elaine's got some sort of weird history here. Clearly, we'll find out about that. Clearly, these two sisters, and the daughter are, bound up in all this, like, unprocessed family drama. But because they're not mentioning their sisters, you have no idea. And then you get Vivian's perspective, where she has twins, and you go, and one of the twins is not named Renata, she's named Ada, and you go, oh shit, what happened to Ada? But we hear nothing about Ada for like another solid chunk of the book. Like, the narrative itself is trying to suppress Ada and Sophie, and it is only as things get worse and worse and worse, both in the present and in the past narrative that we're following, that Ada and Sophie get, like, you really only get their perspective when things are about to really fall apart. And that's when, when at the same time, that's when the house can no longer contain them. So
yes.
It's almost like, the force of the house, of the curse, is also acting on the book and like the meta narrative. And I thought that it pulled that off really well.
My first thought about what the haunting was going to be was, is Vivian going to hide her children from her husband and then bring them back into the house as sort of the gardener's children or whatever? And the secret is going to be that they're not really her parents, and then it didn't go that way. But I think that, like, that would have been an appropriate plot beat for a noir movie, the generation previous, and not an appropriate plot point for the 1960s sort of Hollywood movie. And so, I was like, oh, no, never mind, wrong generation. This is a different problem that we're going to be addressing here. I did actually, like, just to go back to that again, like, the way that the characters speak is not really change over time. You don't get sort of a lot of period appropriate dialogue from inside the family. But the way that the narrative itself is changing still gives you that sense of time. Although I did have to keep reminding myself that it wasn't the 1950s. when we were like in the 90s, just because the house is so the house.
Yeah, it's mostly their clothing is how you can tell it's the 90s.
This is true. This is true. There's a lot of big pants.
There's a lot of big pants, and t-shirts,
Yeah.
like, and
Crop tops, big pants.
yep, and Elaine's, and then like Elaine's sort of quasi grunge, like everything's super big and baggy.
Yes.
And she comes back with her like terrible self-administered college haircut, which is a great little touch. It's interesting. Hair shows up. It doesn't show up until, again, like fairly late in the past narrative, and then suddenly hair becomes super significant because it becomes this way of differentiating what's happening to everybody, while it is also becoming a thing that is being used against Vivian. Like, it's specifically a lot of the violence against her is him grabbing her hair.
Do I have anything to say about haircuts? Maybe it's something about the generational offset that it only becomes a battleground in the 90s. Part of the immigrant experience, arguing about hair. But honestly, I don't know. Here's a question for you. What do you make of the house party and its aftermath?
Well, that's part of the 90s. You can't be a 90s teenage romance without a stupid house party.
But I was referring mostly to Vivian telling her children, "No, you're Chinese. Chinese people don't do this."
I think that that's period appropriate. It reflects a sort of combination of, that sort of cultural conservatism that you often get, I think, in immigrant families of, no, we have to sort of uphold the moral standards of both where we came from and where we are. Because if we're not, everything is so precarious that if we're not perfect, and from the beginning, she doesn't want her daughters to grow up American. They do anyway, but she really does, she doesn't want them to grow up soft, and she doesn't want them to grow up self-indulgent, and she wants them to always follow all the rules. And I think particularly that it's Lucy doing this, really undermines her sense of safety. And I think, helps, I think, because she's already feeling her family fall apart. And the idea that her daughter is doing this extremely American thing that, her husband is just forgiving and laughing off when she's feeling particularly, like brutalized by her white American husband, just I think is adding to this driving sense of crisis.
I think you're right. I think that one of the many cool things about this book is that on top of anything else, it's a story about first generation immigrant experience, second generation immigrant experience, third generation immigrant experience. And that's not the haunting, but the dynamics in first versus second versus third generation immigrant family interact with the haunting in various ways, in time appropriate ways as it goes. And it sort of bounces off it and intensifies it in various ways, which I think is very smart.
Yeah. And it is an interesting contrast that, she's furious about the party, but the fact that her daughter is, making out with the gardener's girls, like, well, whatever. I think it's sweet. And that's very much I'm not threatened by it because I can just dismiss this as, oh, the girls are, girls will be girls.
Yes.
They're teenagers. It's not until, she gets the sense that, that might be more serious that she starts really threatening.
Yes, exactly. No, it's very much well, of course this won't affect any, you're going to get married to somebody eventually, and this will, and this will not affect that. So whatever, kind of reaction.
Right, of course. Plus, also, it gives her blackmail material against the gardener's girl so that she can murder her husband.
Yes, yeah. Again, the horror element and the immigrant family story interacting. In
right,
Ways.
exactly. So the one last thing is, because I made a sort of offhand reference about the Christianity being kind of the Dung family curse, but what do we make of that? The fact that the Dung family are Christians and, the Yin Laurel family are not.
Doesn't seem to have saved them from this curse.
No. Well,
This is sort of a Zen show kind of, your power is not going to gonna cut it in this instance, I'm afraid, Jesus, sort of a deal.
yeah, I mean, I think it's also something of like it is another way of creating distance between them and like they're different kinds of immigrants.
Yes.
They're from a social class where where you join the Chinese Christian church partly because it's a way of it's sort of a proto mutual aid group of people who are also all immigrants or second gen and all speak your language, and you're all coming together. And it also, in a way, it kind of distances them from Vivian because, they keep saying, oh, well, we're praying for you in church. And this, like, she doesn't really know what to do with that. She never responds to anything whenever they mention their Christianity. She's just like, okay, kind of. She just doesn't acknowledge it. And that, I don't think that the Chinese Christian church would have saved her, but it would have given her a local community as opposed to having to flee all the way to San Francisco.
You're absolutely right. Actually, one of the small criticisms that I have about this book is that I would have liked to have, and I don't know where this would have fit, but I would have liked a little bit of character development for Elaine's parents. They do seem to be a bit straight out of central casting.
Yeah. The much of the character development we get from them, I think, is what you see when you get their daughter, I guess it's just Sophie's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where you get, okay, well, clearly, you get the sense that she really does, for one thing, you get the sense that she's much closer to her dad than her mom, which is funny because, like, we see Elaine being the one, or not Elaine, you see the mom being much, maybe it's Evelyn, being much more like compassionate and touchy-feely and close to Vivian. And so, but then that dynamic is not necessarily repeated with their children, where one of them feels just kind of ill at ease with her family, and the other one seems to care more about what her dad thinks than like trying to impress her mom in any way.
Yeah. No, we do get that. We do get that sense, but that's sort of also like her dad is in the garden. She is interested in being in the garden. She wants to impress her dad in the garden.
Right. But like often when you get a family split where, there's one child who's the favorite of one parent and one child who's the favorite of the other parent, but you don't necessarily get that.
No, we don't really even have enough information to say that in this case because Elaine is gone by the time we get our POV stuff from Sophie.
Right, but also I think that's telling. Elaine got out of there she does not feel necessarily the strong pull to, she clearly she stays in touch with her parents because, when Vivian sort of pulls out the, oh, well, when she's like, what, like you cared about my parents? And Vivian is like, well, who do you think donated to their GoFundMes? Which is just this wonderful bit of pettiness. Yes, I indirectly murdered your sister, but I gave to your parents' cancer charities.
Yes.
So don't be so self-righteous with me.
But I think that Elaine's parents fall into a sort of there's a whole lot of characters here who are mostly off screen who are sort of the background, like normative Chinese American immigrant experience characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also like the aunt.
Yeah. Who are all into like, mutual aid and are hardworking and, are, Vivian thinks that she's being excluded by them because of her success, but that's sort of what's happening, but not really what's happening. They would welcome her back if she ever asked them. There's sort of this background, like, layer of virtuousness against which the tragedy of the haunted house and the family curses can be uh, that they can be set, almost. That's the contrasting element behind it, which I guess is just sort of par for the course with a story like this. But
yeah, I mean, you can't flesh out every single character.
Of course, but it does sort of, I think it does sort of end up giving them a kind of
flatness,
flat virtuosity, or virtuousness, right?
Well, okay, I'm going to push back against the idea that like Josiah and Evelyn are particularly virtuous, because again, Sophie's just like horrible guilt and terror over realizing that she's gay.
There is that.
Part of what drives her to, like she even has this thing, and this is again what I mean by character development for Evelyn, is that she has this thing where when Vivian is first being nice to her about it, where she thinks maybe Vivian can help me come out to my parents. And this idea that my parents care more about Vivian than they do about me.
There may be an equally serious pileup of curses in the line of the Gardener's family, but we'll never know because they're not rich and therefore not notable. This is true.
My parents are not going to accept me being gay simply because they love me. They're too Christian for that. But
that's also a teenager's perspective.
It's also a teenager's perspective, but like, and Sophie's definitely a teenager going through some great teenage emotions, but like, I don't necessarily get the feeling that she's wrong, because her parents really are quite Christian. Clear, like the church is really important to them. And so, and it's a fairly I get the impression it's a fairly conservative church. So I think part of that background, kind of what you're calling virtuousness, but it is sort of, like stock, feels like out of an Amy Tan novel or whatever, Chinese American central casting, is this, it's not just virtuousness. It also comes with a certain degree of conservatism and estrangement from their children. And there's also, it's partly Vivian, Vivian is glamorous and rich. And they, Josiah suddenly starts calling her Lienar, after, once at the celebration after she's won the Oscar. Like, there's this sense that they're kind of being pulled into her orbit, partly out of friendship and genuinely caring for her and, worrying about this woman, but also partly because this is this is like this glamour that they wouldn't otherwise be able to touch. Like, Elaine keeps being like, we should move out. You guys should get another job. And they keep being like, what? We should all cram into some, grungy little apartment.
Yes. I consider my question thoroughly answered.
All right. I think now I'm finally done. I could keep going. But my final comment on this book, as perhaps why you should or shouldn't read this book, is that boy, will it make you crave dumplings. Actually,
that is a very little time or energy is spent on describing food in this book. I think that the craving for dumplings may have been inside you, waiting to be pulled out.
Dumplings come up a lot.
They come up a lot, but it's Chinese American.
Well, right, but I mean, the thing is that dumplings in particular come up a lot, and I keep a kosher kitchen, and I really miss dumplings.
Yes, that is
okay,
perhaps
fine.
more
Maybe
to
it's
the
just
point.
me.
I actually have a note here. Is like I could have done with more food descriptions because
that's fair.
Yes, but anyway.
All right, I'm done. I'm done.
All right, we will be with you next time for something which will not be quite so laser targeted at us, no doubt. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello and welcome to Wizards vs. Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about A Manor of Dreams by Christine Lee.
The Manor of Dreams.
All right, let's take that again. Hello and welcome to Wizards vs. Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we're talking about The Manor of Dreams by Christine Lee.
Christina Lee.
Hello and welcome to Wizards vs.
Sorry. Okay, I'm good.
This doesn't bode well. Hello and welcome to Buzz. Do you want to start this one?